Lieutenant Colonel William Balfour was a member of the 40th, 2nd Somersetshire Regiment of Foot, brought out to Australia in the 1820s to reinforce existing colonial powers. Balfour travelled to Sydney on the Castle Forbes in January 1825 and was appointed as Commandant of Port Dalrymple on the 6th of April 1825, taking over from Lieutenant Colonel Charles Cameron. His wife Charlotte passed away in August that year, leaving Balfour as a widower with 5 sons and 3 daughters. In the course of his duties, Balfour had an infamous run-in with Matthew Brady's gang. On the night of the 4th of March 1826, word reached Balfour that the bushrangers were attacking Richard Dry's farm, Elphin, and he set out with a party of soldiers, accompanied by John Helder Wedge, who was a local surveyor that was residing in a tent on the property. When they arrived, there was already a pitched battle underway, and Richard Dry himself was already injured by a bayonet wielded by one of the bushrangers. Wedge explained years later in an interview with colonial historian James Erskine Calder.
We heard the discharge of firearms at the time. Making all haste to get there, we found the whole establishment in the utmost confusion. Everything in the house doubled together, and the inmates in the greatest state of excitement. Mr. Dry without his coat and his shirt sleeves covered with blood occasioned by the scratch of a bayonet. The discharge of guns we had heard was occasioned by Mr. Mulgrave, the police magistrate, who received the first intimation of the attack, having proceeded there with a party of constables. Fancying the bushrangers were in the house, he courageously led the way to the front door. Brady, however, who acted as sentinel and commander-in-chief, walking in and out of the house, whilst the others of his party were putting such things together as they intended to take away, heard Mr. Mulgrave's party coming. He immediately ordered his party to withdraw from the house and station them behind some palings at the back, where they awaited the entrance of Mr. Mulgrave's men at the front door, when they fired their volley. Fortunately, the palings caused them to raise the muzzles of their guns, and their shots took effect on the shingles of the lean-to instead of going into the passage leading through the house. Brady considerately told the ladies that there was likely to be some hot work, and advised them to lay down, saying, "These soldiers, as he thought them, are only rough fellows, and don't care who they hit." The colonel and myself arrived a few minutes after this occurred, and whilst the consultation was going on as what was best to be done, one of my men came to ask me if I'd been in my tent, pitched at the time within 30 yards of Elphin House. In answering in the negative, he replied, "Well, I think the bushrangers are at your boxes." I communicated this to Colonel Balfour, who at once formed a party to go and attack them. We were, however, at a great disadvantage, it being so dark that if a hand were held up, it could not be seen unless held above the horizon. The bushrangers heard us coming, and retreated over the fence, and on our arrival received us with a volley, which was returned without effect, only having the flash of their guns to guide our aim. Their fire was more fatal.
Balfour ordered his men to rush the house and take the bushrangers, but a doctor named Priest took it upon himself to try and cut off the bushrangers' retreat on horseback. In so doing, he made himself a target, and was shot in the knee, and his horse was shot dead under him. The wound would require an amputation, but Priest refused treatment, and died a few days later from infection. Owing to the darkness, both forces fired at each other for a considerable time without effect. The bushrangers then took advantage of their covering, and slipped away into the surrounding bush. Balfour left his men to hold the house while he rode to Launceston for reinforcements, during which he was shot at by some of the secreted banditti. This caused his cap to fly off as he tried to keep his horse under control. Once Balfour had taken off, Brady swooped in and souvenired the cap, which he began wearing in place of his own hat, and referred to himself as Commandant of Launceston. Balfour was widely lauded for his response to the bushranging threat in the wake of the later capture of Brady and his men. So eager was he to retain Balfour's service at the end of his tenure that Sir George Arthur, Lieutenant Governor of Van Diemen's Land, divided the colony into military districts, of which Balfour was put in command. In a missive to Lord Bathurst on the 11th of April 1826, Arthur stated,
"Colonel Balfour's activity in harassing the bushrangers, as well as his uniform conduct as commandant, has excited a strong expression of regret from the inhabitants at his removal, which they have expressed in an address voted at a public meeting convened at Lanston by the sheriff. I confess I am not generally very friendly to these addresses, and therefore I do not lay this before your lordship, but the government order which I have issued on the supersession of Lieutenant Colonel Balfour I have the honour to enclose, and I trust the arrangement I have made in dividing the country into military districts, and in continuing the services of Colonel Balfour in charge of the whole as Commandant, upon the salary he was before receiving of 10 shillings per diem, will meet your lordship's approbation and confirmation.
Balfour did not remain in Van Diemen's Land for long after these new arrangements were made, departing in December of that year for London, eventually being posted to Mauritius and retiring from the military in 1832. He died in London in 1838.
Bail up!